Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining this session. I'm super pleased to have someone with me this afternoon, Simon Binder. Good afternoon, Simon. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you for having this call with me. I'm really looking forward to the topic that we're going to talk about. So I'm very happy to be back.
It's always great to have a show. The two Simons are back. That's
Yeah.
what I like. That's what I like to see. Some people that are tuning in, they probably know you. They might not know me, but just in case they don't know you, why don't you start by just sort of giving us an overview of who you are, where you're working. We can see you've got your Microsoft MVP award in the background. I know that that's probably something you can talk to for a sec.
Yep. Absolutely. So my name is Simon. I'm based in Sweden, work as a workplace architect for a company called TrueSec. TrueSec is one of the world leaders within cybersecurity. So we do most of the things related to secure infrastructure, where I'm primarily based, up until managed security services, penetration testing, secure developments, and the sort. In my role as a workplace architect, I divide my time between actual architecture, working with the culture, working with policies, working with everything that are part of the digital workplace experience today. But I also, as you mentioned, I'm a Microsoft MVP within Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So I still do a lot of technical work within the areas of device management, Windows Virtual Desktop, security and compliance. So that is my background and where I have my technology focus still. But since I do work in workplace architecture, I run into a number of different partners to Microsoft and technologies that works very well with the Microsoft technology. So I've been fortunate enough to have been working with the likes of Citrix, VMware, IGIL, a number of security organizations as well, and really building that workplace experience that we are aiming for the future as well.
Perfect. So you've presented at a couple of disrupts over the years. I think I've seen you in Munich a good couple of times. So thank you for that. One of the things that I've always seen you present on, and you've always been passionate about, I can even see, is that a towel hanging over the radiator in the background? What is that? Windows?
It's actually a Windows Insider scarf.
Wow, look at that. Yeah, made of some nice fabric by the looks of things. So
it's not very warm, but it's shiny.
Yeah, looks good, but yeah, it doesn't keep you very well. One of the things you're obviously very passionate about is Windows, right? I mean, I've seen you present on Office 365. I've seen you present on Windows in terms of a workplace. You know, the reason we're having this call is you put an article out on LinkedIn a couple of weeks back now, and it sort of caught my attention because as one of the biggest Windows fans and a user of Windows, you sort of said when Windows doesn't make sense. And let's kick this conversation off, and perhaps you can give the people that are listening a little bit of background about what that article was about.
Absolutely. So like you said, I'm a huge Windows fan. I've always run Windows. If I were to be given the choice which kind of phone I would like, I would jump at the chance of getting back on Windows Phone as well.
Right.
So I'm hugely passionate about Windows, managing Windows, securing Windows, working with Windows. But especially during the last year or so, I've run into a number of discussions with customers where I feel that, like I did write in the article, Windows doesn't make sense, where organizations are trying desperately to stay in an environment and using the tools they are confident with in the old world. Mm-hmm. So where we have seen struggles of organizations adopting to working from home or working from anywhere, and where they try to use Windows for purposes that I don't feel is at the core of what Windows is supposed to be.
Okay.
So basically, to me, Windows is where I personally is most productive. That's where I can use my tools, where I can do my labs, where I can do my tests, where I can work with a number of different applications, working with data, whatever it can be. And that's the rich experience I want from Windows, regardless if that's delivered from a physical endpoint or a virtual endpoint. That's why I choose Windows as my operating system.
Mm-hmm.
But then you get into situations where I had one customer just a couple of months back, which tried to create a sort of thin client. And we can, of course, talk about what is a thin client at some point too, but where they really only wanted that device to run a VMware Horizon client and then connect to a virtual machine.
Right.
And they did that for a number of different reasons. But then you come to the conclusion that, okay, why are you choosing Windows? And the reason for them is, yeah, we have, in this case, Microsoft Endpoint Manager, so it made sense. But looking at what Windows offers in terms of a very locked down experience, it's still a fairly, by default, unsecure platform. And it requires a lot of performance for the purpose of that device. And I think it's unfair to a Windows operating system and to a fairly powerful device that they were using as the hardware to then lock that down to being something that, in my opinion, it's not.
Yeah. It's there's a good picture that I have used. In fact, I haven't used it. I'm lying. One of my colleagues always uses it, and I wonder whether I might just interrupt this broadcast to share my screen quickly, because it's a bit like this, right?
Yeah.
I don't know whether that makes sense, but if you're looking at deploying Windows in a virtual way,
yeah,
then sometimes you really have to ask yourselves, why are you putting Windows on the endpoint as well? Because the whole reason that you're meant to be moving to, a VDI type of environment is probably because you want to improve security.
Yeah.
You want to centrally manage things. You want to move to single image management, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And then, to then go and put Windows on the endpoint and then worry about, okay, well, how am I going to twist all of these dials and how am I going to deal with management? It sort of brings in that picture summarizes things quite nicely, I think.
And I agree. And I think that goes back to what I again am passionate about, that workplace architecture. What are you trying to achieve? And like you said, there are better and not as good reasons to move to an EUC or a DOS model where you have your desktops and your apps inside of a data center or inside of a cloud. But if you, like you said, have a fully managed Windows machine somewhere, and then you publish another fully managed Windows machine to that consumes a lot of performance, it's costly, and you need to manage it in two different ways. I know that things that I've heard being said on conferences where I've spoken, that it's hard to manage Windows. I personally don't agree. I would be a rather terrible Microsoft Endpoint Manager MVP if I said that it was hard. But it's very, very easy to do it in the wrong way or not having the ability to change the mindset of it.
Yeah.
So that is also why I see that, okay, many organizations would likely benefit of changing the endpoint and moving it into something they are good at, they are familiar with, and managing, like you said, less images, less various places of managing that, simplify the infrastructure, because that could possibly be the mindset change and the technology change they need for the better of the workplace, rather than slowly trying to change the way they may have managed Windows machines for years. And that is yet a reason why we both attended or were part of a discussion a couple of months ago where we talked about workplace architecture. And Spencer Pitts from VMware said this about the 3 Rs, where we had react in the beginning of the pandemic, recover when we tried to fix all of the things that were broken, and then now we have the opportunity to rethink. And then a lot of organizations are at a fork in the road where either you rethink what you currently have and try to adopt the best you can with that, which may be a good opportunity for some organizations. But others have the opportunity to actually completely change the way they view their workplace.
Yeah.
And then use each platform, each tool, each operating system the best possible way for them. And in my opinion, running Windows as a lesser Windows isn't the right way of doing it. Then I believe that there are much better ways of doing it.
Yeah, I think you make some valid points, and I think there are times where there are some comments that may be made, which is like, do you know what? Windows doesn't belong at the edge. Windows is really difficult to manage. Patching's a big problem. Windows updates are a big problem. Why don't you use VDI? And I think people probably would have heard me talk to those lines once
Possible.
or twice, but it's definitely possible. Maybe I've got a blinkered view, but I think you're right, because there is a big difference between the traditional PC lifecycle management tools and where we are now with things like Intune, Microsoft Endpoint Manager, right? And I think the point that's important to make is, where do you want to deliver the workspace? Okay. I find it quite interesting. I'd really welcome your thoughts on it. But when Microsoft released Windows 95, all those years ago, it was regarded as an operating system. We regarded it as an operating system. And if you look up the definition of what an operating system is, particularly back then, there was almost two parts to it. There was the part that says, right, I'm going to make sure that I can communicate with the hardware. And then there's the piece which is, okay, what am I going to present back up to the user and deliver as the workspace? When you are looking at DAS, particularly at the moment, they don't say, oh, we're moving an operating system to the cloud. What they're doing is they're delivering a workspace as a service. And so I think you need to ask yourself the question, where is that workspace going to live? Is it going to be in the cloud? Is it going to be on the endpoint? And then, to your point, start to rethink what tools and technologies that you may use to deploy and manage that, depending on what the answer is. And I think your point is, well, if you're going to put the workspace into the cloud, then maybe there's an alternative operating system like iGel or something else that could be used on the endpoint. But also, if you decide to put your workspace on the endpoint, then guess what? There are new and better ways of probably managing that today than there have been for the last 5, 10, 15 years.
Absolutely. And I also agree on that, where the workspace lives, and where I think a lot of, I did get some comments on the article saying that, but people don't want a thin client. They want a Windows machine, or they want a Mac. They want a full operating system. But I don't agree on that. I think, again, that what users want is the ability to do their work, use their apps, and they really don't care about it. Then there can be things like company branding, like it's something to be seen using a Mac or and Lenovo or a Surface or whatnot. It builds the reputation of the company, but very few actually cares about what it runs. And I strongly believe in that we will see either workspace solutions from the UC vendors, or things like Teams or Slack, or even a browser like Edge or something else that will be the workspace. And that will be what you see. And then you don't care about what it runs underneath. Windows or any other operating system will then bring some kind of enhancements to it. But then you also need to take the decision on, is it worth the management? Is it worth the cost? Is it worth the security risks of any operating system to do it like this, when what your users care about is the application that runs on top, or the workspace that runs on top?
No, completely agree. It's a really interesting conversation, isn't it? And I think there is always going to be different opinions on these things. But I think there is one thing that is very clear, which is, as particularly based on what's happened in the last 12 months, now that there are more let's call them edge devices,
Yeah.
sat outside the corporate network, that have historically run Windows as the operating system and as
Yeah.
the workspace. Those historic tools and perhaps some of those methods and processes that were put in place to keep them patched and managed and up to date historically are now just not suitable for the world that we live in today. And I think the only thing that we're really saying here is that, you know, take a step back from perhaps the technology in the first instance and think, right, what is the workspace that we need to deliver? I mean, we've already seen Citrix and VMware come up with, you know, their new versions of what a workspace could look like. Yeah. We've obviously seen a massive adoption of things like Teams, and, you know, WVD, Citrix Cloud, VMware Horizon, AWS. I mean, all four of them have seen massive growth in, you know, desktop as a service type of solutions. I think there's just a new way of thinking when it comes to how and what you need to deliver down to the endpoint. Yeah. And it's quite interesting, if I may, you know, we've just signed, as you know, I think you put in the article, we've just signed an agreement with N Computing, yeah, to get Igel OS on ARM devices. That's almost one end of the scale. On the flip side of that, we've also got agreements in place now with the likes of LG and Lenovo, where our operating system is being shipped on those pieces of hardware out of the factory. And what's quite interesting is that some of those devices are actually pretty powerful. You know, they're not thin clients anymore. You know, they're devices that have actually got a fair amount of beef to them. And customers are looking at running the Linux version of Teams, the, you know, Ring Central, Zoom. They're running those things natively as part of a workspace that then is being delivered also from the cloud. So I think we are in an interesting time. And I think it really does come down to, you know, are you looking at Windows as an operating system, or are you looking at it as a workspace, and how do you deal with that?
And I think you also need to be honest to your own organization. Like, I've had discussions where, okay, we can't run WVD, or we can't run Citrix or VMware or Frame or whatnot because it's expensive. Because you never think the full way through that if you move in that direction, you can save so much on hardware procurement, like you said, patching, application management, all of that. So it's about weighing the scale, sort of. Where do you want to make your investment? And it can be 50-50. You can, of course, have a mixed environment where it makes sense, or you go one way or the other. So it's also about, again, it's a mindset change where Windows shouldn't be your only option, and you should use Windows for when Windows is good. I had a discussion with a customer just this morning where we talked about their workplace, and they had to decide if that were like a aircraft carrier, or if it were a cruise ship, or if it were a container freighter or something like that, because currently they try to be it all, and that drives quite a lot of cost. So finding the right approach for either parts of your organization or the entire organization, and use the tool that is most suitable for the job. That is what I do in my daily job. Yeah. And I do feel that if you then, again, like going back to where we started, try to do and use Windows for something it isn't, then you're doing it wrong. And there are better options.
Yeah. So what about security? I know we're probably a little bit short on time, but let's talk about security.
I think it's great to see that the focus is there. I did a session in regards to security at the Swedish Citrix user group just a couple of days back. And the feedback I got from that session was fantastic. Like, I think we, in some cases, we haven't understood that even in the EUC world, it's essential with that zero trust mindset that I'm passionate about. So I do see that all the vendors are trying to push the general security mindset also to that point of view. And that it's more about the entire journey of the data, the applications that we need to take into account, starting at the endpoint. how do we protect and secure that so we know that it's a secure endpoint that connects to the apps which we publish. Then going through the entire session, the authentication, to the actual session hosts, or whichever name you give them, the virtual, often Windows or Linux machines that run your app workloads, and then the network connectivity within that cloud or data center. So I'm definitely seeing that getting a much bigger attention. And I think SolarWinds, for better and for worse, made it clear how sensitive we are when it comes to building that infrastructure that is resistant to such an attack.
Yeah.
And there again, we have, I'm absolutely convinced that the worst kind of security we can implement is security that works against users. So that's always what and like if you were to go around and ask your colleagues, yeah, we're now going to do a huge cybersecurity project, how do you feel about that? There are very few people that would be happy and start to laugh and give you a hug, or whenever we are able to hug each other again. But that is something I would like to change. And I again see that mindset change into something that will enable users by working with security. So what does a thin client and like published desktop or a published app enable you to do? Well, it enables you to do exactly what everyone have liked to do for years already. They can work from anywhere.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, and it is secure because that's already been taken care of.
Yeah. It's quite interesting. I won't mention who it was, but I did a panel with some US customers recently, and they were talking about security, how they've pivoted and everyone's now working from home, but some of the additional steps that they've had to take in terms of compliance and reducing risk, and one of the things they were talking about was, at nighttime, all of their employees had to lock their PC in a cupboard, even though it was at home, and they all had to connect via a VPN because there was more than one person working in home. And for me, I'll be honest with you, it sort of makes me think back to what you were saying earlier, which was somebody there needs to rethink what's going on there, because what you're trying to do is use existing technology and existing methodology to try and support this now what is work from home. And actually, there are a number of different ways in which technology could sort of remove some of those changes that they put in place and actually support that in a far better way. That could be Microsoft Endpoint Manager. That could well be some form of improved authentication or identity management. It could be, a better way to use where the applications are being stored. It could be to use VDI, desktop as a service. But it was somewhat frustrating, actually. Is what I would say. To sort of listen to how that story was panning out. But good. I mean, that's good news. That's opportunity for us to continue to educate, I suppose.
Absolutely. And like you said, it's all about understanding that we have built, in many cases, our entire infrastructure, our entire security posture on our physical network. And when we get to the new normal where the physical network doesn't matter, a lot of the things that did work just fine while in an office will be counterproductive for what we have now. I still have a number of organizations that wants to get Windows patches over VPN from their internal servers, where it would be much more efficient to get them from the internet. But it's about that mindset changing something that may have been written in stone 10 years ago. And dare to be brave enough to actually change and challenge where we are today.
On that note, I've spoken to a different customer in the same vertical, and they had actually said that if and when their users did return back to the workplace, that they would always be treated as dirty from that moment on, right?
Yep.
Even when they walk back into the office, they would still actually be going out and then back in again.
Yep.
So that just proves that some organisations are definitely thinking in this new way. So just to finish up, Simon, thank you for your time today. What should people watch out for? What would be your top tip around Workspace EUC for 2021?
I think it's two things. First and foremost, I think that was Disrupt 2019, challenge everything. That just because you have done things in one way and that you may have your users returning to the same office for whatever reason, rethink the way you have implemented your technologies and use the technology that is most appropriate to you.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing would definitely be consider security from the endpoint all the way into the cloud or the data center. Because attackers, they will find the weakest link in your security chain and go for that. So ensure that you feel confident in that you have protected as much as you can all the way through or from your user to whichever application and data they try to access, wherever that resides.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, good. If people want to get in contact and follow you, how do they do that?
I would say Twitter is the best, at BinderTech. But I'm also very active on LinkedIn, which was what started this discussion. So Twitter and LinkedIn would be the absolute best ways of getting in touch with me.
Perfect. All right. Simon, thank you for spending the last 30 minutes with me. Always great to catch up. Always a pleasure to have you present at Disrupt. Sorry we couldn't do it in person this time round, but I really hope to see you soon.